Okay, good evening. I'm Sarit Zehavi, Alma's president and founder. Thank you for joining us today. Our panel today will deal with the implications of the war in Ukraine and the Middle East, on the Middle East and Israel's security. For those who are not familiar with our work, Alma is an independent, non-partisan research and education center that focuses on Israel's security challenges along the northern borders. We see it as our personal mission. It is definitely my personal mission to provide research and analysis of the geopolitical reality and the developments regarding Israel's security challenges on all three sides of the border, by the way, South Lebanon, Southwest Syria, and Northern Israel. We are situated in Israel's north in the Galilee, 6 miles or 12 kilometers from the border with Lebanon. We encounter these security challenges in our day-to-day life, and I invite those of you who've never been here to come and visit us now that COVID ended almost a year ago, and you're welcome to come. We're inviting all of you also to check our website, israel-alma.org. And now I'm extremely proud to introduce my partner for the panel today, Dr. Dina Lisnyansky. Dina Lisnyansky is an expert on political Islam and the Middle East. She holds a PhD from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and is a well-known consultant in the field of radical Islam and security. Dina is an associate professor at Shalem College and an adjunct lecturer in Tel Aviv University, as well as in Reichman University. Dr. Lisnyansky is a research fellow at IISMR, an EU-based think tank, where she is conducting research on immigration to the EU. She is also a senior research fellow at ISGAP, Institute for Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy. Dina has numerous publications on terrorism and radical ideologies in English, Hebrew, and Russian languages. And she is a frequent guest on various TV programs and channels. And I'm so happy that you are with us today.
Thank you. The honor is all mine.
I also want to thank Dvorah Forum, who partnered with us to this webinar. Me and Dina as well are members of Dvorah Forum. The purpose of this forum was to promote equal representation of women in key decision-making positions in the fields of national security and foreign policy within the Israeli security and policy-making establishment and in the public discourse, based on the understanding that this end goal contributes and enhances Israel's national security. So now I want to give a few words of background on the war in Ukraine. You know, it's been a year. It started with a massive Russian attack on February 24th, 2022, including missiles to really wide areas in Ukraine, air bases, radar stations, logistics centers, land forces attacked from 4 different directions, from the north, from Belarus towards Kiev, the capital, from northeast toward the city of Kharkiv, from the east toward the districts which are more affiliated with Russia, and from Crimea Peninsula toward the city of Kherson. The Russians arrived around 30 kilometers from the capital, from Kiev, but never entered the city. And the main efforts against Kiev, against Kharkov, eventually failed, and the Russians were repulsed by the Ukraine forces, by Ukraine army, ended with the withdrawal of the Russians in the months after the war started. We are talking about tens of thousands of casualties on each of the sides in this war, including 4,000 citizens that were killed in the Russian attacks on the cities of Ukraine, 4 million, maybe more, refugees to the nearby countries. Maybe some of them succeeded in going back to their homes after the withdrawal of the Russian army from the area of Kiev and Kharkiv. Summer of 2022 was very important. In summer of 2022, the Russians were defeated actually in many areas in the battlefields with the land forces, and they started to use more and more attacks with missiles and UAVs. We very quickly understood that these UAVs were provided by Iran. In the Alma Center, we published a lot of information around that. We saw the Russians training in Iran to launch these UAVs. Most of these attacks were against infrastructure, civilian infrastructure sites, energy, bridges, airports. Around 30,000 civilian sites were damaged and hit and targeted by these attacks. We can say a lot of things about this war. I'm not sure we will succeed in, getting to all the different aspects of this war in Europe. I don't want to say the most important one because we had Serbia and Yugoslavia, but a great deal of war which the Europeans didn't experience in many decades. And I want to focus on the implications in the Middle East. In the end of the panel, we will answer questions. So I invite all of you to write us questions in the Q&A. And Dina, I want to start from actually the hottest question, the most important question that really bothers me as an Israeli. Around the globe, and when I meet the groups that are coming to Israel, we are being blamed. We are being blamed that we are not doing enough for Ukraine. There are publications that all Israeli prime ministers, Bennett, Lapid, and Netanyahu, were criticized by the Ukrainians, by the Americans around this issue. How do you see that?
Actually, this specific question was asked basically by everyone, and people are, in fact, narrating it very specifically. They're asking whether Israel is choosing the right side of history right now. So this kind of question should be putting Israel under a huge spotlight, I would say. And I would like to, ask another question by myself now. Why is this question not posed to Turkey, for instance? I mean, Turkey as well is, in fact, maneuvering between the two countries. It is providing the Ukraine with, as you know, Bayraktars from one hand. And on the other hand, we can see that it doesn't impose sanctions on Russia. I mean, it does play the game. It plays a double game. So we can see Turkey playing on both fields without any questions being raised regarding their loyalty. But Israel is always put in the middle, and we are being asked really, really difficult questions. So the answer maybe should not be a whole answer, but rather a different question that I would ask and try to answer, okay? So the question that I would ask is whether Israel has the privilege to decide. Because as far as we see right now, we can see that on the one hand, Israel has a lot of sentiment towards Ukraine, and it works a lot with humanitarian organizations and helps, many civilians from Israel are helping, in fact, and Israel does take sides sometimes, and we can see how Russia, in fact, one might say punish Israel sometimes in Syria due to the fact that it's not being loyal to Russia. We will talk about that later, I guess. But on the other hand, Israel is restricted heavily by Russian presence in Syria, and it has to rely on Russia's cooperation with Iran. So these are two questions that we need to raise even before we ask whether Israel.
Oh, Dina, did we lose you? Okay. Until we'll see Dina with us again, I want to add, Dina, are you with us?
Yes, of course.
Okay, we lost you for the last sentence.
The last sentence, I said that these are two questions that we need to ask before we actually ask whether Israel is choosing the right side, because Israel is being put on the spotlight, as I said before.
I would want to develop this further, and I want to ask you, what about the Jewish community in Russia, the Jewish community in Ukraine? Are these something that we should take in consideration when we speak about the Israeli interest in this issue?
Sarit, they are definitely playing crucial roles in all this choosing game. So, in fact, the Israeli establishment is, in fact, seeing the Jewish communities in Russia as basically hostages, because due to the fact that Israel is choosing sometimes to help Ukraine, Russia is not only punishing Israel in Syria, it also penalizes the Jewish community within the Russian Federation itself. It does that in all kinds of ways. But for instance, not long ago, the Sokhnut, the Jewish agency, was about to be closed in the Russian Federation. Russia said that the Sokhnut would not be able to operate in the borders, within the borders of Russia anymore, which is basically closing the only influence that Israel has in Russia right now, beside their presence, their diplomatic presence, which is actually important for us. So
why the Sokhnut is that important for us?
Excuse me?
Why the presence of the Sokhnut in Russia is that important for us?
Well, I think it's again, the right question maybe would be, why would Russia even try to touch Israeli presence anywhere in Russia? It's a diplomacy, it's diplomatic ties. It's highly important for us to maintain institutions of Jewish origin in every place where there are Jewish communities. So why would even Russia try to touch Sokhnut or any other agency that we have there, if we're talking obviously about cultural agencies and nothing else? So this is a question we need to raise as well while we speak about the Russian possibilities to influence Israel. Due to any kind of choice that Israel would make on this case.
Okay, we will get to Syria. Probably many of you are asking themselves, what about Syria? Is Syria something that we should take in consideration? We will talk about it, but before that, I want to add something. First, I would like to say that Israel was the first one to send a field hospital to the bombed Ukraine, while into Ukraine, not on the borders, not on the near countries, but inside Ukraine. There were Israeli nurses and doctors that came to treat the Ukrainians themselves. And I want to say, to add something else, which is about Iron Dome. We hear a lot from President Zelensky saying that Israel should send Iron Dome to Ukraine, that we must send aerial defense systems to Ukraine. I want to say something around it. There may be more place for maybe a little bit more collaboration when we speak about, especially when we speak about Iranian drones, when we speak about intelligence, when we speak about air defense. But in any case, it will be limited. And there are two reasons for that. First one, eventually, we cannot afford with our national security that this kind of information or intelligence will fall in the wrong hands. And there are a lot of wrong hands inside Ukraine. We must make sure that first and foremost, we take care of our national interest in this.
Sarit, how about the fact that we need to train people for that for like about a year, for instance, and after that we would need to place soldiers or people who work with the Israeli army in Ukraine, which basically goes against any international laws we have provided by Russia as well.
Moreover, most people don't know that Iron Dome is not an automatic technology. There is a soldier that pressed the button each time that their intercepted missile is being launched against a missile, and it needs a lot of training and experience. But even on top of that, the size of the state of Israel is 22,000 square kilometers. The size of Ukraine is around 600 square kilometers. Okay, I lost the counting of how many times more. But we don't have enough Iron Domes. I, as a resident of the Galilee, I know that Iron Dome will protect in a future war the strategic assets of the state of Israel rather than small communities in the north. How could we provide these to Ukraine? We need many batteries, many missiles that each of them cost around $50,000. This is an imaginary scenario. We don't have enough. So again, maybe we can talk about a little bit more assistance, but not the way Zelensky is imagining. That's my point of view anyway.
Yes, there is something really interesting about this imagining stuff. The thing is that Israel is kind of a fantasy in Ukraine, or at least it was before the war started. And since I have a lot of friends and family there, I do know for a fact that Ukraine thinks about Israel in really big terms, in larger terms than Israel itself. somehow Israel is portrayed in Ukraine and sometimes in other countries as well as more than just a regional power, it's as even a global power, which is absolutely not true. We need to take that into consideration when we speak about this small Israel. But some people, again, they are really thinking that we are so much more due to our technology and due to our capabilities. But really, we need to put them into perspective. So yes, the perspective is a bit more maybe tragic in terms of the fact that we cannot spare Iron Dome to other countries, even though maybe we really, really want to.
I totally agree. And now I want to move forward to Syria and to talk about that for a moment. Okay, so let's explain the Israeli interest in this. Okay, the Iranians are using Syria as a corridor. In the past decade, they are trying to transfer advanced weapons from Iran through Iraq into Syria, from there to Hezbollah in large scales in various ways, whether it's in flights that land in Damascus or even in Aleppo, and then trucks that take it further to Lebanon, whether it's trucks that are going all the way from Tehran into Syria, and sometimes even when we speak about the maritime route through Latakia. We published an in-depth report about this issue. We are talking about advanced weapons, which are components of UAVs, drones, which are long-range missiles, which are sophisticated aerial defense systems that can endanger the Israeli jets, actually, which are components to try to make the Hezbollah missiles accurate, part of this project, what we call PGM, precision-guided missiles. And in the past decade, Israel is fighting this. Israel is fighting this in what we call the campaign between the wars, meaning that we are bombing these shipments that are coming into Syria due to the statements of Israeli leadership. More than 1,000 attacks within the last decade, a few hundreds only in the last year. Some of the commanders said an average of an attack every week or two in the past year. The IDF is saying that the success is around 70% in this campaign between the war to throw these shipments of weapons, and 90% in attacking the infrastructure of production of this kind of weapons. This is a massive operation, and it means that there is Israeli presence in the sky, and there is a Russian presence in the sky, and coordination is needed this way or another. And we had some incidents that, you know, this coordination was not enough, and it damaged our relationship with the Russians, and we had to give some explanations.
Also, the Russians are exploiting this coordination, obviously. They're exploiting the situation in order to harm this coordination sometimes, and even turn us into kind of scapegoats sometimes. I'd like to even address, and I'm sorry that I cut you in the middle, but I'd like to address a certain point, and maybe it has a lot to do with what you've just said, Sarit, because it's highly important. You've been talking about the tactical part, and I would like to add the strategic part here, due to the fact that Russia seemed to be withdrawing from Syria because it was spread too thin in the Ukrainian border. But the thing is that Russia is not withdrawing from Syria. It's just a myth. Basically, Russia has been it was consolidating forces, mostly Wagner group mercenaries, and some of these mercenaries were just thrown to Ukraine, but the other parts were left in Syria, especially in the areas where they are needed according to the Russians. And by the way, these areas have nothing to do with Israel, which is very unfortunate, because on the border with Israel right now, everywhere where Russians are withdrawing forces, the Iranians are trying to put their own forces, which brings us to a certain point where Israel just cannot rely only on its good relations with the Russians. Israel needs to bring the Russians to a kind of a threshold where there would be pragmatic interests, mutual interests, both countries, in order for this, let's say, agreement or unwritten agreement to go on. And how do we do that? This is a question, right?
Just to put things in proportions, in numbers, following what you said, the Russians are actually having around 10,000 soldiers in Syria. This is nothing comparing to what they sent to Ukraine. Maybe they sent out 1,000 out of these forces into Ukraine. So Russia still views Syria as a strategic asset, and it will never leave. I agree with you around that. But, you know, even inside Alma Center, we had a discussion, and I would love to hear your opinion around that. Israel truly needs to take in consideration the Russian position when we speak about the campaign between the war, or maybe we should do what we need to do, and it doesn't matter what the Russians think about it.
The thing is that right now, Moscow is not just withdrawing forces from Syria, it also is withdrawing generals, important generals that were successful, sometimes highly aggressive in Syria. It is just moving them to Ukraine right now. So whether we should consider Russian position in Syria all the time or not, I think it's like the million-dollar question here. Maybe we should consider right now thinking about some kind of another agreement, maybe not with Russia. I will just give us a few examples here, maybe not examples, just implications. So right now Syria is divided into three main regions. Three main forces are involved in Syria due to the civil war that it experienced for more than a decade. So we have the Russians, which are basically 10,000 soldiers, but the most important thing is not the number of soldiers, is the impact. And the impact factor there is really high due to the fact that Assad is relying on Russian influence in the region. And this costs more than just tens of thousands of soldiers. So this is Russia. Now we have Turkey. And Turkey is, in fact, not just influencing, but it has a vast presence in Syria, in the areas that are important to Turkey, meaning we're talking about the north, basically, and the northwest. So also, we need to speak about Iran. So three highly important presences in the region, and maybe three global powers or regional powers. Russia is a global power, but those two are regional powers. I would say regional superpowers, right? We're talking about superpowers today. So they are involved highly in Syria, deeply in Syria. Israel would be the fourth regional power that is involved in Syria this way or another, even if we don't have a serious presence there or any presence at all, unless we would be speaking about the aerial presence sometimes. So what do we do from here? Do we need to consolidate everything that we have there and to just decide to build a different kind of relationship, maybe with Turkey? Maybe we need to speak with, I don't know, maybe we need to talk about a kind of a regional agreement with other countries that might interfere in what is going on there. So there might be all kinds of solutions, long-term solutions. But in short term, we still need to look into this reality when Russia is here and considering Syria not just its backyard, but its southern border. And I'm quoting Putin here. Putin said that Syria is, in fact, Russia's southern border. And one might say, wait, but Syria is like only 800 kilometers away from Russia. This is not just it's a lot, right? So it's a huge distance in Israeli eyes, but in the eyes of a Russian person, this would be really, really close to home, because 800 kilometers means nothing in Russian terms. And Russia is, in fact, acting in terms of guarding its borders. So it would invest many, many more years and power in Syria only to maintain its presence in the region. It is highly important to its strategic. It's not just imperial ambitions. No, it's specifically a strategy to keep the borders safe. So yes, I would say that even if we try and make all kinds of other agreements with other countries, we really need to take care we need to tend to our relations with Russia anyway.
Maybe we should say a few words about the set of tools that Russia has when we speak about the punishment to Israel if it will, do something that will be behind the red lines of the Russians when we speak about Ukraine. We had a lot of debates around that here in Alma Center, and we pointed out a few things that could be done that actually the Russians already did in the past when there was a crisis in relations. So we mentioned the issue of the Jews in Russia, the Jewish agency, but let's talk about the set of tools in Syria itself. And I think the first one is providing of technologies that today are not in the hands of Hezbollah, or not yet in the hands of Hezbollah. We've seen that with the UAVs, which in a matter we will elaborate around that, Iran has the advantage. But when we speak about anti-aircraft batteries, it's vice versa. Russia is holding advanced systems around that, like the S-400 and even the S-300, that last time we had a crisis with the Russians, they provided that to the Syrians, but it was not yet provided to Hezbollah itself. So I think this
by the way, the S-300 has been moved to Ukraine since the fight began, yes.
And another thing is, again, providing intelligence. Russia, and we've seen this happening, published, about Israeli attacks in Syria in timings that were not very comfortable for us. This kind of publication saying Israel did that in this way or another way, which we would prefer that Russia would keep silence. In the 60s, in the war of attrition, we have seen the Russians actually launching missiles against our jets. This is an extreme scenario, but extreme scenarios are what we are dealing with here, right? So I think this is something that we are also taking in consideration, and I think the Israeli Air Force is also taking that in consideration when we speak about how to maneuver between the drops of what is happening here in Ukraine.
Definitely. There is also the question of nuclear weapon and Iran. And this is a question that worries us even more than just S-300 in Syria, even though, of course, we really need to pay our respects to the S-300. This is important. And all of the other technologies that Hezbollah might or might not have. But the thing is that when we speak about nuclear threat, this is something that Israel is very sensitive about. This is a very sensitive topic here in Israel. This is a good enough reason to make decisions or to speak in different ways to stakeholders in the Middle East. This really has really heavy implications on us, and this is one of the, I think, the largest reasons why we choose to stay neutral in the question of would we choose which side, the Iranian side or the Russian side. We do not choose sides when we speak about nukes, obviously.
So eventually we can say that when the Iranians are providing UAVs to Russia, the question that we ask is what the payment looks like. Is it ammunition? Is it Syria and complying with more Iranian presence in Syria? Because when this war started in Ukraine, it was clear that there is a competition between the Iranians and the Russians in Syria. And now there is kind of, okay, we are not touching your interest there, you do not touch our interest there. So it's a different kind of relationship over Syria. And of course, as you said, the question around the nuclear issue is this is how the Russians are going to pay back for what they received from the Iranians. I'm sorry. And just one comment, maybe. Even if they don't influence Iran in this way, they are playing a regulating role with Iran. And once they back off from this, I would say, no, okay, we're not going to regulate anything anymore. This would be enough for us to cross the threshold into a very aggressive potential war with Iran. So we do not want that. We really want the Russians to stay in this neutral position of regulating the relations or the potential aggression between the two countries. We are really not interested in this. So this is another reason to stay in good relations with Russia, or at least to be cautious. I totally agree. And I want to stop for 1 minute to make sure we're all at the same page when we speak about UAVs, because we've mentioned that a few times. Yes. And I think that not all people understand and have the knowledge when we speak about Iranian UAVs or the Iranian UAV army. Even in Alma Center, when we published the report around it, we were surprised to discover that actually the Iranians are a leading power when we speak about developing of UAVs. It's not just replication of American UAV that fell in the hands of the Iranians. The Iranians are experts to UAVs. They started in this industry since the 90s, since the war in Iraq, and they're actually holding around 50 types of UAVs from what we call 9 families. provided to the Hezbollah in Lebanon, provided to the Houthis in Yemen. We've seen an attack against Aramco in Saudi Arabia in 2019. We've seen an attack against in Dubai. The Saudis themselves are saying that hundreds of UAVs attacked against Saudi Arabia in the past 5-6 years. We've seen this also in Venezuela, Iranian UAVs that were provided to Venezuela, only 2,000 kilometers from Florida, less than 2,000 kilometers from Florida. And these UAVs can be very accurate to long ranges, can be for intelligence gathering, can be attacking UAVs with carrying missiles or smuggling ammunition, or suicidal, like we've seen in Ukraine, crashing on their targets. All of these are threatening actually all of us. They're a threat to Europe, a threat to the United States, a threat to Israel. And I think this is part of what the campaign between the war is trying to do in Syria, to also attack these kind of capabilities. And I must say something, because we are talking about the war in Ukraine, and something happened since we decided to have this topic on this webinar, is the earthquake. So I must address that in one sentence, and then we continue to talk about Ukraine. And I must say that if something will pose any limitations or questions around the campaign between the wars, is the earthquake, because it is clear that the Iranians will take advantage of the earthquake to smuggle ammunition into Syria under the cover of humanitarian flights. It has been done in earthquakes in the past, in Iran.
It's happening right now under our noses, basically yesterday.
Under our noses, it is clear that this is happening with flights and with trucks. We've seen tens of trucks coming from Iraq by the Zehavi into Iran. We've seen Kahani, who replaced Qasem Soleimani, already visited northern Syria, making sure that he knows exactly where to do.
Of Quds Force, yes.
Yeah, and it's not just humanitarian. There is humanitarian aid in this, but it's not just humanitarian aid. It is clear, and yet any attack of the campaign between the wars at this timing, Israel will be blamed that we are attacking humanitarian aid, while it will be clear that it's not humanitarian aid.
Yeah, so we need to provide, all kinds of evidence that nobody has. But definitely, I would also like to address the fact that right now, not just Iran, but also Russia and other countries who do not participate in this war, everyone is regarding Ukraine now as a battlefield, as a training battlefield where new weapons are being used. Usually it is happening the other way. Usually people, kinds of countries, are using the Middle East as a training. Right now, all kinds of new weaponry are being used in Ukraine. And yes, we need to also address the fact that the Iranians are basically trying all kinds of new UAVs in Ukraine as well. And I guess you will be speaking about the tactical part, so I will only address the strategic part here. So what we can learn from this is that Iran is actually also really trying to understand the way the national community is, in fact, regarding the war in Ukraine. The Iranians right now, or at least the Iranian government, they would like to know, well, how far Russia would go until there would be a proper response from NATO countries. And the fact that it is not happening up until now, it gives Iran a whole lot of hope in maneuvering against Israel in the future. So we need to understand that this is a huge strategic problem for Israel as well, not just for Israel, for many other countries in the area, for the UAE, for Saudi Arabia, for all the Sunni alliance that is basically fighting Iran in proxy wars for more than a decade now. So we need to regard this war also as a precedent to the future, for the future as well.
I totally agree with you. And, I look at that from the intelligence point of view. Sure. As a former intelligence officer and analyst. A year ago, no one anticipated that this will happen in Ukraine. I was trying to understand, I'm not an expert to Ukraine. I was trying, or to Russia, or to Putin. And I was trying to understand a year ago, what's going on? Is this going to develop to war? And who would have believed that we would see Russia threatening nuclear weapon, raising the
Full-blown
alert.
war.
Yeah, raising the alert in its nuclear system. This is like unheard of. So I think what we can learn around that is that when we deal with radical ideologies, expect the unexpected. You cannot just say, okay, it will not happen. It seems irrational. Sometimes I've been asked about Iran. Maybe it's just words, it's not deeds. So look what happened in Ukraine. We thought it's just words, and it was not words. It was a lot of deeds afterwards. So
of course, the thing is that sometimes Western countries regard everything in terms of Western logic. But the thing is that Russia is not a Western country. And Russian logic is not Western logic. It has a whole different path of logical thinking. So we need to understand the way Putin thinks. It's not as simple as it sounds. Basically, Putin does think in a way that many emperors, Russian tsars, were thinking before him. And well, it's not my expertise, my area of expertise. Obviously, I deal with the Middle East more than with Russia. I have ties to Russia, personal ties. Obviously, I was born there. So I know just a bit about the mentality that is there. But what we need to understand about the Russian expansions is that they are being done due to, let's say, a kind of primordial fear of invasion. So the fear for Russian borders is huge. It is a motivation for Putin to go on and start a war and maybe more wars in order to protect the borders of his country. So the Ukraine is only one step. I mean, before that, we've seen what happened in Georgia. And before that, we've seen what happened in other cases. And after Georgia, we've seen what happened in Crimea, which was the first step into Ukraine. And it was absolutely obvious in 2014 as well. But you see, the absolutely obvious, which I'm like quoting here, quote unquote, it was not so obvious to the West somehow, because everybody was hoping that Putin would be a logical leader. And while speaking in those terms, obviously, we do not speak about the logic of Putin. We're speaking about the Western logic, where we think in terms of, start treating each other borders with respect, or at least relative respect. So there is nothing like that here. Okay, different ambitions.
So just before we move forward to the two last questions, I want to remind everybody to write questions in the Q&A here. You're invited. We will answer questions in a minute. Dina, okay, we don't know when and how this war will end, and it seems like we are now in kind of a phase of attrition, meaning the Russians are bombing areas of Ukraine here and there. But how is this going to look like? How the world would look like when this war will end? You know, the different positions of Turkey, of Iran, of Russia, the relationship between all of these countries. How do you see that?
I'm so happy that you named Turkey and Iran, because I do not want to speak about the whole world. Obviously, I would like to talk more about the Middle East. So yes, let's speak about Turkey. The thing is that Turkey, since the beginning of the war, has gained a lot of power. And it's really important what you just said. I agree with you absolutely. The point of the earthquake is crucial here. Now, this earthquake obviously shows us the weaker sides of Turkey, but Turkey has become, during the past few years, a very powerful regional, let's say, superpower. Okay, so while Turkey is fighting for its place on, let's say, on the geopolitical map, while Turkey is trying to pave its way into the EU unsuccessfully for many, many times and many years, meanwhile, Turkey decides to go into another direction. This direction would be east. And Turkey has a lot more influence in the East. It has a lot more influence in the countries that are former Soviet republics. We're basically talking about the whole of Central Asia and Azerbaijan. So while Turkey is gaining power there, it also gains a lot of power in the Mediterranean as well, due to its program of the Blue Homeland. And the Blue Homeland program means the Mavi Vatan, if it's Turkish. So the Blue Homeland plan that Turkey has means that it wants to divide differently the Mediterranean in the way that it was not divided before. It would fight Greece and Cyprus, only to get more international waters, more economical waters, to find more gas in these waters. This is highly important for Turkish energy ambitions, and they are very, very big. Okay, and they're growing bigger. Now, with all that is happening due to the war between Russia and Ukraine, Turkey is getting a lot of power. It also gained a lot of prestige because it was one of the only countries that were able to start, maneuvering a little bit of a dialogue between the two countries during the war. Russia and the Ukraine, both of them, they actually asked Turkey, they asked Erdogan to start a dialogue between them and to start some kind of peace talks between them. Obviously unsuccessful, but at least the prestige stayed. It stuck with Erdogan himself. So again, Turkey is gaining a lot of power. What will happen to Saudi Arabia after the war? Due to the sanctions that Russia imposes after NATO sanctions were imposed on her. So now we see that there are a lot of different things that are happening due to the fact that Russia's war is restricting all the access to oil and gas. Hence, the prices on oil and gas are on the rise all the time. So all of these implications will definitely change the power balance in the Middle East as well.
Okay, fascinating. We have tons of questions. So let's see if we can deal with that. I'm looking at the Q&A now. And let's see what people were asking. Okay, there is a question here that says, what implication would be for the IRGC as a terrorist organization on the supplies of weapons to Russia? Maybe I should start and I let you address that as well, Dina. I'm sorry to say, but even though Iran provided the IRGC with Russia with UAVs in an amount that, I don't know, between 200 and maybe even more, we don't see this damaging the IRGC itself. It looks like the Iranians eventually will manufacture the supply needed for Russia to Russia without, separately, without damaging what's in the hands of the IRGC. Would you like to add something around that?
Well, the IRGC is not even regarded as a terrorist organization in most countries in the world. We are struggling to ban IRGC in countries like the UK even. So if speaking in terms of how much it would damage, for instance, the image of IRGC, not just the flow of weapons and all kinds of other equipment, then their image will not be harmed at all. Obviously, the IRGC would be perceived, let's say, a normalized, quote-unquote, organization, even though it's a full-blown terrorist organization.
Okay, there is another question here about the earthquake that we discussed, whether this will influence or change the situation of the war in Ukraine itself.
The earthquake?
The earthquake in Syria and in Turkey.
Well, do you mean the implications it will have on
the war in Ukraine? Yes.
On the war in Ukraine, because of the fact that maybe the Russians will try to aid Syria and Turkey?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, so first of all, there was a very nice talk between Assad and Putin today, and they agreed on more aid coming from Russia, but there is absolutely no implications, unfortunately, on the war in Ukraine. It goes on as planned from the Russian side. So no difference would be probably there.
Since you mention it, and it's a very relevant topic, I want to say something around that. The areas that were hit in Syria are divided to two. It's areas around Aleppo, which are under control of the government. These are the areas that are getting the aid from the Iranians that we spoke about. And there are areas that were hit that are under the control of the rebels that are mostly affiliated with Turkey, and there is also Turkish presence there. Now, these areas at the first few days right after the earthquake refused to get any humanitarian assistance, and it is clear that it is getting much less humanitarian aid than the areas under the control of Assad. This was also a question that we discussed here in the Alma Center. What's going on with this area of Idlib? In our maps, you described how Syria is actually divided to areas of influence. In our map, this Idlib area, which is under the control of what's left of the rebels, which are actually affiliated with Al-Qaeda and connected to Turkey, these green areas in our maps, Syria is not interested in taking them over, because there were battles on the time and the Syrians had troubles in, fighting and actually gaining these areys back. Maybe the earthquake is an opportunity, to
Absolutely.
surrender.
Absolutely. One might consider this situation as a very good opportunity.
Dina, we lost you in the middle of the sentence.
More affiliated with Turkey. So yes.
Dina, we lost you in the last sentence. Can you repeat that?
Yes, absolutely. When was I lost? Just tell me the sentence.
Just the two last sentences.
Yeah, sure. So perhaps Assad would consider it a really good opportunity to start gaining power again in Idlib and to fight maybe now some of the insurgents that are there and that they're supported, by the way, by Turkey itself. It's funny that you mentioned that, because yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes we're talking about terrorist organizations that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, by the way, that gain a lot of support from Turkey. How is it happening, right?
Okay, there is a last question here. Is there any danger of the momentum of the war in Ukraine, like Sweden and countries like Russia, Turkey, and Iran targeting the Israel gas reserves in the Middle East? Maybe I should expand the question for the energy question. We have gas reserves. How is this going to, one of the questions I asked, Europe has some difficulties and lack of energy. Is the gas reserves of Israel are truly a game changer when we speak about helping Europe in this?
So it's a very good question, actually. And one of the most interesting things is really, I'm perplexed sometimes by the fact that it is even happening. But the fact is that since the war has started, some of the countries in Europe started signing contracts with countries that have gas reserves or perhaps future gas reserves that nobody knows, like how much gas there is even, or what future holds for them. But contracts have been signed, not just with Israel, but with other countries as well, such as Egypt, such as Libya, such as even in Lebanon, even prior to the fact that gas was found there. Even now, contracts are being signed with countries that are really they're really concerned due to the fact that this war, nobody knows when it's going to end. It seems like an endless war, because it is absolutely impossible to predict when it's going to end and how much longer people would be, in fact, relying on energy resources that are right now almost unachievable.
I would add to that, as far as I understood, the Israeli gas reservoirs as they are today, and you mentioned potential, as they are today, cannot really be a game changer when we speak about providing gas to Europe. They are definitely a game changer when we speak about the Israeli energy independency. And I want to move forward to a very good question here about, okay, we talked about the Israeli stance. We talked about, the reason why the stance looks the way it is, but what will make us change our position and eventually, completely follow the Western position here and say, okay, we should completely neglect any interest around Russia because this and that happened. And we need to completely be on that side.
Okay, I will try really carefully to answer this question because we are not dealing with prophecy, obviously. But then, no. So the thing is that the power, the global power in the region would have to change. This means that Russia would no longer need to stay a really important player here in Syria or a regulator between Israel and Iran. So whenever this changes, I guess this would be a very good trigger for Israel to support Ukraine only, and that's it. Perhaps other things, other factors could, in fact, influence Israel to do so, but well, they wouldn't be. I would say they wouldn't be connected to the Middle Eastern problems or affairs. So again, this is not exactly my area of expertise. I would leave this to other experts. In my opinion, only one factor really matters here. And this is the Russian-Iranian relations. Once these relations are changed, this would be a game changer for Israel as well.
I would even stress on that. Change also means if we see that the Russians and the Iranians are collaborating in a way that we cannot tolerate.
Obviously.
And maybe even further than that, when we speak about the Americans and the relationship between Israel and the Americans, it is clear that United States for Israel is an ally. This is nothing like the relationship between Israel and Russia. And so for us, if there will be a deterioration in the relationship between the Russians and the Americans, it is clear where Israel will be and should be.
We'll have to change, we'll have to shift positions, that is for sure. But also this would mean for us that the US might need to interfere more in Middle Eastern interests, something that the US or the US policy, foreign policy, has been trying not to do so in the last few years. We could see what happened after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We could see what happened after the withdrawal from Syria in 2019. So yes, maybe this would be a game changer.
Okay, there is a question here that I'm not sure we have enough information to answer, but let's try. Okay, why did the UN didn't demand from the beginning of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria that all borders between Turkey and Syria will be completely open, as the Germans suggested when it just happened? Do you have
from the beginning of the conflict?
No, of the earthquake, just after in order to enable humanitarian aid go back and forth between both countries.
Okay, it sounds logical, but the point is that I'm not sure that it's a matter of national interest for Turkey, for instance. I don't think that Turkey is up for it. So the UN, might it impose such a decision on sovereign?
I'm losing you, Dina. I'm losing you. So I would say two things around that. First, yeah, I agree with Dina. The UN is not in a position to demand, especially not from these countries. And second, I don't think Turkey is interested in an open border with Syria. I don't think Syria is interested in an open border with Turkey. We should bear in mind that the areas that were hit in Turkey and also some of the areas that were hit in Syria are Kurdish areas that Turkey is not interested to see them open, and that people will be able to come and go freely in this place.
Maybe we should explain, yes, maybe we should explain that Turkey regards the Kurdish opposition as part of terrorist groups that are linked with terror attacks also in Turkey. For instance, some of the insurgents, some of the opposition to Assad, who were Kurdish troops, they were considered by Turkey as terrorist organizations, even though they had nothing to do with terror in Turkey itself. Hence, the Turkish Turkish influence in Idlib and in all the other parts of Kurdish areas in Syria, and their efforts to hold these areas and to try to control them.
Okay, we are getting into the conclusion part. And I would like to say, and another last statement maybe. I looked at this war also when we speak about the land battlefield, how this warfare looks like when we speak about tanks trying to take over land. And basically they failed, these Russian tanks. Maybe surprisingly they failed, I don't know. And, I asked myself, what can we learn from that? What exactly happened there? We could see that first, fighting in the winter with tanks is not a very good idea.
It sounds like a war from the 20th century, not from the 21st century.
Completely, though it is clear that if you truly want to control large areas, you do need boots on the grounds or tanks on the grounds, except you need better tanks. And more motivated soldiers and better maintenance, and you need to take in consideration long routes of logistics. And
maybe not torturing the local population once you occupy their land.
You cannot control local population if you're not there, and you cannot be there just with old tanks. Eventually what happened is that these old tanks in the winter had to go on the main routes where the Ukraine anti-tank squads waited for them. And, if you get the first few tanks, you get the whole convoy of tanks, and the whole effort is not exactly what the Russian meant. So, I don't know, this is what I take from this war when I thought about the battlefield itself. And when a big irrational and maybe different rational dictatorship want to go against a very motivated country and population that is willing to defend itself. Dina, what's your last statement here?
Well, in my opinion, I feel that unfortunately, what I take from this war, that it has been going for 1 year already, and NATO countries haven't done anything to stop it. I mean, more than just giving weapons to the Ukraine. Like, there is a specific saying right now in Ukraine. They're absolutely sure that this war is not even against them. It's against the US. And they understand it. They understand that we are talking about a bipolar world all over again. And these two forces are in fact being regarded as huge forces that would divide the world again only if you let them. So the question that comes from Ukraine mostly is, why don't you help us more? This question is not only addressed to Israel. This question is basically addressed to all the Western countries, first of all. Okay, and first of them being the US. So the question is, why don't you help us defeat this potential danger to the whole world? So this is what I'm taking here from this war, that sometimes people are left alone with a huge enemy, and they need to fight their own battles. This is what I take from it.
Well, I totally agree. We'll end up with that. And guys, thank you for being with us. If you enjoyed this webinar, if you're interested to support us, you're invited to donate on our website, israel-alma.org/donate. Alma has various of educational programs. You're invited to come here and join us physically, digitally, to come with us to the border, to participate in our special security crisis simulation. I am Sarit Zehavi from the Galilee in Northern Israel. Thank you, Dina, for this very interesting discussion. Thank you again. Thank you again for Forum Dvorah for partnering with us in this webinar. Shalom, everybody, and see you next time. Bye-bye.